Let me start on a personal note, and then we'll get to the other issues. He's from upstate New York. He's also a Jersey boy. Okay, West Orange. To become the ambassador from Mr. Netanyahu, basically said you must, and it's a terrible word, renounce your American citizenship. It's not forego it's renounce your American citizenship. I would imagine for you, even though you were thrilled and delighted to have this position, that was tough.
I was born in upstate New York, but raised in New Jersey, and feel very close to New Jersey. I probably spend more time defending the state of New Jersey than I do defending the state of Israel. Terribly maligned state, wonderful state, great shore, lot of pine barrens, unfair, and it is true. One of the reasons I moved to Israel was out of a sense of the values that I received as an American. My commitment to liberty, to freedom, to equal rights. And I felt that by moving to Israel, in many ways, I was fulfilling myself as an American. And yes, the requirement by God is an American requirement, not an Israeli requirement, was very, very difficult. Trust me, you don't want to have to go through this. The Prime Minister of Israel went through the same process I did. You go to the American embassy, and you stand in front of a flag, in front of a consular officer, with witnesses. David, did you go through this too? Oh boy, it is really painful. And they read you your renunciation of rights. And you have to swear that you understood what you are giving up as an American citizen. You sign 10 different affidavits, and they take your passport with a hole puncher, and they punch it right in front of you. And I felt I'd been punched in the gut. No kidding. I had worked with many people on this staff before, and frankly, I cried. It was very difficult for me. But, okay, so they can put a hole in my passport, but they can't take away my accent. They can't take the fact my deep addiction to football. Don't try to get in touch with me on Sundays. Forget about it. Wasn't it great games this weekend? Oh my God, great game. And they can't take away my love for this country and everything it represents, and the great sense of privilege and honor I feel to represent this country, the land of my birth, to the land of my forefathers, and what that means for me. Our father, who's doing great, still living in New Jersey, fought from Normandy through France, fought for this country, and also served in the Korean conflict. Our whole family has been involved in the military. It has enabled me to better interpret Israel to Americans and Americans to Israel. Having come from American, I think David would agree with me, is a tremendous advantage here, and a deep and enduring privilege. Last point, my wife, Sally, is still an American citizen, a dual citizen, and at the embassy they told me if she stays married to me, someday I can get a green card.
That leads me. We're going to be very close by the time this is over. To a quote from you, which is perfectly appropriate to this. And, this is quoting you, so you can't contradict it. Israelis and Americans inhabit not only different countries, but different universes and different realities. You would embody both then. When you say that, do you mean there's something irreparably different by that?
It's hard for me to hear him with this microphone. You said, I said they come from different... I'll repeat it. There's people up there, that's why. Israeli, I'll repeat it. Israelis and American.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. Startup Nation.
Here we go. Israelis and Americans inhabit not only different countries, but different universes and different realities. That quote is from you.
Okay. I don't remember it, but I'll take your word for it. What's the question?
The question is, you would inhabit both of those realities. So can you explain from an Israeli point of view how disparate it is when you look at the American point of view?
I think it's very difficult for Americans to, apart from the period of, say, 9/11, and for the people of New York, to understand what it is to live with constant fear of rockets falling onto your neighborhood, falling onto your homes, your schools, what it means to put your kids on a bus, a municipal bus in Jerusalem during a period and not being certain that they'd actually reach school or be able to come home on the school. That kind of environment where your neighboring countries are not exactly Mexico and Canada, and they're in the throes of profound upheaval, and that some of the leaders of those countries are calling for your destruction. That kind of difference is a very profound difference. It's the almost obvious difference. To live in a country that is sacred to over half of humanity. And I don't just mean the holy places in Jerusalem, but your parking lot in Jerusalem is on holy ground. And as such, it's qualitatively different than any other parking lot anywhere in the world, and certainly any other parking lot in the United States of America. And that can create tensions, it can create misunderstandings, but also endows on us a tremendous sense of responsibility to ensure that there's free access to all faiths to this holy land. From an Israeli perspective, it's very difficult to look at a scene like, here's a specific example, Tahrir Square, January 2011. 1 million Egyptians parading in the streets and protesting for liberty. I have to explain to Israelis that when Americans see that scene at Tahrir Square, they think Lexington and Concord. We think oy vey. And we think, we've seen how these, what begins as largely Western-oriented liberal revolutions in the Middle East, whether in Iran or in Lebanon or in Gaza, start out being sort of pro-Western, but they quickly get hijacked by radicals and become something else. And, try to explain to Israelis who are saying, don't these Americans understand? Are they being naive? This is very dangerous. So here's a good example. That was what was then called the Arab Spring, was a very good example of a different universe and a different reality.
Well, there, of course, were people in America saying, be careful about celebrating the Arab Spring. Be careful where spring can turn into summer, can turn into winter. Mm-hmm. That it would be you use the word naive, to assume all good will come from this. Because, as you know, there are the consequences, the unintended consequences, and then the really bad stuff that happens. In the sequence of those three things, where are we, from your perspective, relative to, say, Egypt, which is such an important player in keeping peace and keeping lines of communication open?
Henry Kissinger once asked Zhou Enlai of China whether he thought the French Revolution was a success. And Zhou answered, it's too early to know. Right? And the same thing is true about the upheaval throughout the Middle East. We don't know where this is going. Nobody knows. Yes, there's an interim result right now. There's been an election in Egypt, and the Muslim Brotherhood came into power. And we have no illusions about the Muslim Brotherhood. We don't think there's a moderate ring or immoderate ring. Muslim Brotherhood has been around from 1928, and their ideas about Jews, their ideas about Zionism are well known to us. And what was printed on the front page of the New York Times, for example, an interview with the president of Morsi before he was president, and some of the things he said about Jews.
Jews are descended from apes and pigs, 2010.
Apes and pigs, very common for the Muslim Brotherhood, but not only the Muslim Brotherhood. The Middle East is rife with anti-Semitism.
Excuse me for interrupting. Just so that we understand, when you hear somebody like Morsi said something like that, I mean, it's a horrific thing to say. But it's not an uncommon thing to be heard. And there's a perception that Morsi can only back off of that a little bit. He needs to back off of the statement, but to keep his own credibility, his own street cred at home, he has to stay with it a little bit.
Well, we're aware of this. What's more important to us than what Morsi says is what Morsi does. And we will be, needless to say, we are not thrilled to hear some of the things he has said and continues to say, in some ways, about Jews in the state of Israel. But when the president of Egypt had to choose last November, when there was an Israeli operation in Gaza against the thousands of rockets that Hamas was firing at over 1 million Israeli citizens, he had to choose between being the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the mother organization of Hamas, and being the president of Egypt. And he understood that in order to remain the president of Egypt, he had to revive the Egyptian economy. And you cannot revive the Egyptian economy without restoring tourism, which is the major source of income for Egypt. And there cannot be tourism unless there is stability and security in the Sinai Peninsula, where all of the resorts are situated. And there cannot be American aid to Egypt, which is the second source of income for Egypt, unless there's peace with Israel. And guess what? Morsi decided to be Egyptian and not to be Muslim Brotherhood, and he played a constructive role in enabling us, together with the good offices of Secretary of State Clinton, to reach a ceasefire, which saved thousands of lives. And so at the end of the day, he's going to keep on saying, he may say venal things about us. There was an interview with Wolf Blitzer on CNN where he said some very, I think, unjustified and cruel things about us. But better that he should say bad things and do good, constructive things than the other way around.
Is there a code that you understand? Is there a code?
Listen, there was anti-Semitism during Mubarak's period too. And Egypt, the Egyptian press and Egyptian bookstores were rife with protocols of Elders of Zion and Mein Kampf.
And the blood libel and all.
And everything. It was there during the Mubarak period as all. And I think that this is a problem that is endemic to the Middle East and is symptomatic of the profound malaise of the Middle East. If the Middle East is ever to enter the 21st century, it's going to have to disabuse itself of medieval hatreds.
Staying in the Middle East, Syria is the moment right now. A lot is going on. The university was bombed today. There again is that Arab Spring kind of question. You can get rid of the bad guy, let's say, but who comes in afterwards? What is your perspective right now on who the rebels are and how is that going?
The answer to that is nobody knows what the future holds, but we all can derive lessons from the past. We have empirical evidence. Several years ago, this is before the outbreak of internecine violence in Syria, I escorted the head of our military intelligence to the White House, and we made a presentation at the National Security Council, the essence of which was that Bashar al-Assad and the Ba'athist regime in Syria had become prohibitive from a security point of view. Bashar al-Assad had joined with the Iranians in providing 70,000 rockets to Hezbollah, one of the largest rocket arsenals in the world. They had built up a chemical arsenal as well, the largest and most diverse in the world. Bashar al-Assad had tried to create a clandestine military nuclear program. Thank God that doesn't exist anymore. We made the case that while Bashar's father, Hafez al-Assad, some of you may remember him, was ruthless, he was ruthless but somehow predictable, responsible. His son was ruthless and reckless. And we just couldn't afford him anymore. So we had concluded that if he departed, it would deal a tremendous blow to the strategic arc between Tehran, Damascus, and Beirut. It would give a tremendous blow to Iran and Hezbollah. We wanted him gone. That position has not changed to this day. We know that really very few things could be worse than what existed before. We also understand that the longer the fighting goes on in Syria, the greater will be the involvement of jihadist elements, and the greater those jihadist elements will have access to advanced weaponry, including unconventional weaponry, and it's a danger for the state of Israel. We are assiduously building a fence along the Golan Heights, a new smart fence similar to the fence we've built along the Egyptian border. But it won't be a panacea. I work a lot with Secretary Janet Napolitano of Homeland Security. She never tires of telling me, you show me a 10-foot fence, I'll show you a 12-foot ladder. But we have to be prepared for that possibility. Still, any outcome we think in Syria, almost any outcome in Syria will be better than what we was presenting with before. And that type of reasoning of, we have to look at what was in the past and based ourselves on empirical evidence is also relevant to the Iranian nuclear program, because we there have been two nuclear sites, military nuclear sites, that have been neutralized in the Middle East by military means. One was in Iraq and one was in Syria. And both those operations were preceded by doomsday scenarios. There's going to be a third world war, rockets are going to be flying. Both those facilities were neutralized, and none of the doomsday scenarios played out. Nothing happened. Matter of fact, those regimes went to great lengths to deny that the operations even happened.
But Iran seems different in the public.
Again, we're going on an empirical basis.
Okay.
We do not know what the Middle East looks like should the Iranian nuclear facility be neutralized in the same way. But we know very well what the Middle East is going to look like the day after Iran gets a nuclear weapon. We know 100% what the Middle East is going to look like with that. And that's a Middle East in which not only Iran has nuclear weapons, it's a Middle East in which terrorists have nuclear weapons. It's a Middle East in which numerous Middle Eastern states have nuclear weapons, and we won't just be worrying about the chemical weapons arsenals, we're worrying about nuclear stockpiles. So it's very important to, I think, base yourself on empirical evidence.
You hear a lot about the conflict between the Israeli red line for Iran and the United States red line for Iran, and that they are not the same. There is a thought always that Israel will really not act unilaterally. They'd have to have Washington's, if not permission, at least they'll be in on what's going on. What is the reality of that to the point that you can tell us?
Well, first of all, let me say that no country has a greater interest in reaching a diplomatic resolution of the Iranian nuclear threat than Israel. We are threatened with national annihilation. We are in Iran's backyard. We do not have the capabilities of a country like the United States of America. We have the most skin in the game. So we have the greatest interest in reaching a diplomatic solution if it were possible. Unfortunately, for years now, the Iranians have used diplomacy as a means of gaining time to spin out more enriched uranium. And while the sanctions, and we've been very supportive of the sanctions, have succeeded really beyond anybody's expectations, taken a huge chunk out of the Iranian economy, sent the Iranian currency into a nosedive, alas, they've had no impact on the Iranian nuclear program, which keeps on accelerating. And not only are they enriching more uranium to a higher level, they're also moving parts of that program underground into fortified facilities that may be beyond our capabilities to reach. So when we talk about red lines, we have to keep that in mind as well. The Iranian nuclear program has many components. It has a weaponization program. It has a rocket program. They have rockets now that can reach not just every city in Israel, but most cities in Eastern Europe. All of that is going on secretly. We can't see it. But there's one part of the Iranian program, one part that we can monitor, and one part that we can stop. And that's the enrichment part. And we know exactly the rate at which Iran is acquiring uranium at 20% enrichment, which is a very short step away from weapons-grade uranium. And we know that if the current accumulation continues, they will cross the threshold of what's known as SQ, sufficient quantity for one nuclear weapon, sometime in the late spring or early summer. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, you remember, in the fall at the General Assembly, had the picture of the bomb. You know, he drew the red line. And he said something that was very, very important. He says it's not important, it's not crucial. The crucial question is not when Iran gets the bomb. It's not even crucial when the Iranians decide to go and make a bomb. The only pertinent question is when can we no longer prevent Iran from getting a bomb? And once they cross that red line with the enrichment program, then they will take the other parts of the program, the weaponization, the rockets, the fuse, they'll put it together in a room a heck of a lot smaller than this room, somewhere in a country that is half the size of Europe, and they will put it together. And we will not know when they put it together. We will not know. And I think since the Prime Minister's speech, I think there is a broader understanding of the fact that we will not know. And on the basis of that understanding, we have entered into a discrete dialogue with the United States of America about the way that the two countries, Israel and the United States, can realize President Obama's commitment to preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. We both have signed on to that. And we also recognize and appreciate that President Obama has said that Israel has the right to defend itself. by itself, if necessary, against any Middle Eastern threat or any combination of Middle Eastern threat. Only Israel can best decide how to defend its citizens.
And thank you for segueing into Chuck Hagel. You're an ambassador, you're a diplomat, you probably don't even want to talk about this, but we will. It appears that Chuck Hagel, and I think most of you are aware of the conflict around Chuck Hagel's statements he's made in the past about the people being afraid of the Jewish lobby, about being far softer on Iran and tougher on Israel. He is dancing very, very quickly now to the right tune. I believe it's today he spoke with Barbara Boxer, and I believe that she is now supporting him for Secretary of Defense. I know you can't really say anything, but I want you to say something about how your government feels about Chuck Hagel. And say whatever you want, because nobody's listening. It's all right.
Israel, in respect for its democratic ally, the United States of America, does not comment on presidential nominations or confirmations by the Congress. We just don't comment on it. We will look forward to working with the next Secretary of State. I've worked with Secretary of Defense. I've worked now with 2 Secretaries of Defense. And I know under these 2 Secretaries of Defense, they have presided over the closest security relationship between the United States and Israel. Our security relationship is superb. Our Minister of Defense, Ehud Barak, said it's the closest and best security relationship the United States and Israel have ever enjoyed. And that is going to continue. Nothing's going to change about that. And again, we look forward to working with the next Secretary of Defense.
You, sir, are a diplomat.
Thank you.
You touched on this earlier about the devotion to Israel that really comes from the Old Testament and the foundation of this country. Do you, at times, and I don't really have a question here, I just want you kind of to free associate to this. We have this unique situation in the United States where if you were to look for the people who are 100% in lockstep with Israel, with the Netanyahu government, you would find that 100% close to it among Republicans, Christian Republicans, evangelical Christian Republicans, a far greater percentage in complete support of Israel's position right now than you would among the Jews of America. And certainly if you were to poll the unaffiliated Jews of America, you will find them very liberal on the issues of the West Bank settlements, freezes, etc. There's not a direct question here. I just want you to talk about that a little bit. To somebody from another world, they'd say, you mean the Christians are for Israel, but the Jews aren't.
It's not true. I get surveys across my desk every day. I'm inundated with statistics. And they all say the same thing. Not only that is support for Israel in this country at a 20-year high. And this is in spite of all the turmoil and vicissitudes, 20-year high. But that Israel is one of the truly bipartisan issues, certainly where I'm coming from Washington. A recent decision by the Senate, actually the last decision, one of the last decisions of the Senate before the elections, was a decision in support of Israel in the face of the Iranian nuclear threat. It passed by a majority of 90-1. How many resolutions passed that way in the Congress today with that type of majority? A truly bipartisan support, and by the way, preserving that bipartisan support is a national interest for the state of Israel. There are agreements and disagreements with Israeli policy on different aspects of Israeli policy. Sometimes I get criticism from the right, that the Israeli government is too liberal. Sometimes from the left, that we're not sufficiently liberal. But and free discussion of our issues is part of our democratic cultures, and we respect that. But the fact of the matter is, the core support for Israel in this country, for the existence of an independent, sovereign Jewish state in the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, the land of Israel, a state endowed with an unassailable right to defend itself, is is close to a national consensus in this country. And the fact our quest for peace, our quest for security, just receives overwhelming support here. And it makes my job, frankly, very, very easy.
And you even get along with the people with J Street.
Do we agree with everything that J Street says? J Street doesn't agree with everything we do? I talked to J Street. I've met with their board several times. And we have a dialogue. We have a discussion. By the same token, there are organizations which have a different perspective and are critical of some of the peace moves that the Prime Minister has made, Prime Minister Netanyahu, particularly the moratorium, the freeze on settlement building for 10 months, which was unprecedented. Unfortunately, the Palestinians didn't avail themselves of that opportunity to return to the negotiating table. So, we listen. We're engaged in a dialogue. The pro-Israel tent is very, very wide with big flaps and stretched pegs, and we want to keep it that way.
You talk about the freeze. From the Israeli point of view, there are a lot of Americans, liberal Americans, who basically say, hey, stop it with the settlements. Keep the freeze going. You're getting in the way of peace. Don't have these settlements. You're just exacerbating the situation. From an Israeli perspective, when you look at those kind of statements, do you think of them as naive or do you think of them as dangerous?
I think of them as short-sighted and not necessarily constructive, and I'll tell you why. Settlements are not the core of this conflict. There was an Arab-Israeli conflict for 50 years before this first settlement was ever built. So that certainly wasn't because of settlements. Richard mentioned in my introduction that I spent some years in the Israeli army. I participated in several wars. The most traumatic event for me in the Israeli army was the disengagement in 2005 from Gaza, in which Israel uprooted 21 settlements and 9,000 people from their homes in an attempt to advance peace. And we didn't get peace. We got 9,000 rockets in return. Settlements were not the issue there. We know from what has been revealed from the negotiations between Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat in 2000, or between Ehud Olmert and Abu Mazen in 2008, that settlements were not the issue. Settlements are not the issue. The issue is whether the Palestinians are willing and able to recognize a sovereign and legitimate Jewish state in the Middle East. And that's not a new problem. This is going back not only to the partition resolution in 1947, but the first partition idea of the British in 1937. The Palestinians have consistently turned down offers of a two-state solution. And they've been offered a state more frequently than any people in history and have turned it down with violence. They've been unwilling to accept a Palestinian state because the price of doing that has been accepting a Jewish state. And that is the reason. Now, having said that, we understand that the Palestinians are not thrilled about settlements, but we say we're willing to negotiate. The settlements are a subcategory of the border and territorial issues that can only be worked out face-to-face at the negotiating table. Prime Minister Netanyahu 2 years ago got up in front of a joint session of Congress and said that he understands in the event of peace there will be Israeli settlements that will lie beyond Israel's borders. That was a major concession. Palestinians should have leapt at it. Unfortunately, they didn't.
When the Prime Minister went before the joint session of Congress, there were observers who said, here's the man who could win the Republican presidential nomination hands down.
I was at that joint session of Congress. By the way, it's the second time he's been invited to address a joint session of Congress. It's an honor that has been given to less than 10 foreign leaders throughout American history. And he received something of the order, by different counts, either 32 or 29 standing ovations, which is a record. And the standing ovations was from Republicans and Democrats alike.
Very diplomatic. I don't know if there are people old enough. My grandfather, Harry Schwartz, always talked to me about Palestine. When he spoke of Palestine, he was speaking of a Jewish homeland. It was called Israel, but he couldn't make that change in how he referred to it, so he always referred to it as Palestine. And I often think of what if he were alive today, and he would hear this discussion about what should we do with Palestine. He wouldn't understand any of this.
No, he wouldn't. Before 1948, when you referred to a Palestinian, you're almost invariably referring to a Jew. The Palestine Pavilion at the 1939 World's Fair was the Zionist Pavilion. And there you could have genuine Palestinian food, a Wiener Schnitzel, a Palestinian representative greeted you at the door. It was a woman, kibbutznik, in very short shorts. It was the most popular pavilion at the 1939 World's Fair. Palestinian almost invariably referred to Jewish people. In fact, the 1947 partition resolution talks about creating a Jewish state and an Arab state in Palestine, not a Jewish state and a Palestinian state in Israel. And I don't know, I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal a while ago about the 25th anniversary edition of Life magazine for the State of Israel, which I had. And even in the 25th, came out in April, May 1973. In April of May of 1973, look in that edition, and Palestinians were still Jews as late as 1973. So it has become more accustomed to refer to the Arabs of Palestine as Palestinians, but once upon a time, the Palestinians were the Jews.
Let's speak for a moment about... All right, it's okay. The Iron Dome. All right, suddenly there seemed to be this magic bullet called the Iron Dome that kept a lot of Israelis from being hurt or killed. You touched on it a little bit. The Iron Dome is am I saying it right, Iron Dome?
Iron Dome.
How do you say it in Hebrew?
Kipat Barzel.
I like it that way. All right. It's not perfect, though. I think I quote you, it's 85% accurate, so if 1,500 rockets are fired at you, you do the numbers and you see how many get through.
You're better at math than I am. Go ahead. Yes.
Well, all right. It has a way, the Iron Dome, it can move around in any terrain, and it can somewhat magically determine if a rocket is heading for a population area or not. But it is not, to use your word earlier, the panacea. So you wonder, in seeing how quickly the Iron Dome was created, what's next in the pipeline?
First of all, a word about Iron Dome. It's true. Iron Dome is a game changer.
But not a game ender.
But not a game ender.
Yeah, okay.
And it's true, especially if you're dealing with unconventionally tipped warheads, that if 15 out of every 100 get through, it's a problem. It's still a grave threat to the State of Israel. But the Iron Dome system, which has consistently proven effective in combat, the first iron anti-ballistic system to prove effective in combat situations, and it's literally rocket science. It's getting two warheads to meet at supersonic speeds in midair, has given the Israeli government time and space to work out diplomatic solutions, and has enabled us to avoid the type of ground operations that we experienced in 2006 and 2008, which not only cost lives, but expended a tremendous amount of diplomatic capital. It was difficult to explain to the world. We've avoided this. Prime Minister Netanyahu has not had, during his time in office, had not had any ground operations. And a lot of it is thanks not only to his great prudence and restraint, but also to the Iron Dome, which gives us that space. And we couldn't have that Iron Dome to the degree that we have. It's an Israeli invention, and we produced the first 2 batteries, but then with generous support from President Obama and the Congress, we've been able to now produce another 3 batteries. One of those batteries, the 5th, was deployed during the recent exchange of rockets with Hamas in Gaza. Within an hour of being deployed outside of Tel Aviv, it had already taken down its first rockets. So it was very, very effective, and we should have a 6th battery during the course of this month. Ultimately, we'll need between 10 and 13 batteries of Iron Dome. Iron Dome is designed to take out short-range rockets. The next layer is a system known as David's Sling, and capable of interdicting medium-range rockets, cruise missiles, and even certain aircraft. And that is a joint U.S.-Israel project. It's tested out here in California, and it has met all of its benchmarks and has proven successful. And we hope to have that deployed as soon as possible. Beyond that, we have 2 other systems that are designed to take out suborbital long-range rockets and orbital ICBMs, missiles that actually break out of the atmosphere, go into space, and come back down. Those are the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 systems, which already exist. We're working now on the Arrow 3 system and advancing that. So certainly by the end of the decade, Israel will have a comprehensive, the world's most comprehensive, multi-layered anti-missile defense system, and it's all a product of this extraordinary relationship between the United States and Israel.
And
I'll add one more thing, Larry, if I
yes.
could. These systems will not only protect Israel, these systems will protect American forces and American allies around the world, and the United States is looking at ways that these systems and elements of these systems can be integrated to help defend the United States.
There is a saying that you live with. It's in the genetics of people in Israel, and that is the first war that Israel loses will be the last war that Israel really loses. So all this talk is very, very important. But I want to get on to something else. Is it possible to be an anti-Zionist and not anti-Semitic?
Anti-Zionist. Abba used to say that being anti-Zionist but being anti-Zionist was like not being against houses, but it's saying you're against houses, but you're not against people living in their homes. That was an Abba even line. I think that the distinction has become increasingly blurred, and we see around the world, less in this country, but elsewhere around the world, there are people who will use anti-Zionism as a cover for what is essentially anti-Semitism. And I think we have to be very sensitive to it and very aware of it.
When you look at what's happening in Europe now, and there's a rise in anti-Semitism in Europe and certainly in France, for instance, there are people in France who are making aliyah because they feel they can't live there any longer. What does it bode for you? What does it say to you?
What does it bode for me? It bodes a very unfortunate situation. We're saddened by some of the positions of people in Europe. It's not all of Europe. We can't generalize about Europe. Some of our best friends in the world are in Europe, particularly in Eastern Europe. Countries that 20, 30 years ago, before the fall of communism, were arrayed against us. Today, our best friends. It is saddened, and when you see that European countries hold us to a completely different standard, when they actually betray their own principles by backing a unilateral Palestinian move in the General Assembly. Many of those European countries were witnesses to the same agreements that the Palestinians violated materially by end-running negotiations and declaring a Palestinian state unilaterally. That was very unfortunate and sad for us. Our relationship with Europe is important for us. It's important on many levels, not the least of which is a commercial. Europe is a major customer for the State of Israel. And so we look on with concern, and again, with dismay and sometimes disappointment on some of the positions of European populations and governments.
Would you like the United Nations to go away?
Yeah. Israel came into being in part because of a United Nations resolution. As a result of a United Nations resolution, we have been active members of the United Nations. There are times when the United Nations has fulfilled a constructive role. They arbitrated our disagreement with Turkey over the 2010 flotilla incident, and a miracle happened. The UN found in our favor. The UN upheld the legality of Israel's maritime blockade of Hamas. It upheld the fact that our soldiers had acted in self-defense. So it's not blanket. But we'd like the UN to stop obsessing and focusing obsessively on Israel in venues such as the UN Human Rights Council, which actually has an article in its constitution which says every year it must pass human rights condemnations of Israel. It's the only UN organization like that.
Membership.
It's amazing. Article 7. And start focusing on issues like the massacre of 60,000 Syrians, for which the UN up to now has proved completely impotent.
Hamas, Fatah. They are not together yet. They have been adversaries. Do you foresee in the future that they will remain adversaries to the positive nature of what's happening in the future, or do you see them coming together now?
Well, we hope we don't come together. And here's another example of complete agreement between the government of Israel and the Obama administration. We both agree that Hamas cannot be party to any negotiations as long as it refuses to accept three conditions. It must accept Israel's existence, it must disavow terror, and it must accede to all the accords that have been signed between the United States, between Israel and the Palestinian Authority since 1993. Hamas categorically rejects all of these conditions. And so if the Palestinian Authority has a rapprochement with Hamas, that means that they have aligned themselves with a terrorist organization. If you read Hamas's covenant, it doesn't just call for the destruction of Israel, folks, it calls for the destruction of Jews worldwide. Hamas is a genocidal organization. How then do you make peace with such an organization?
We only have a couple of minutes left, and I wish we had much longer, but what I would like you to do, and I know you said earlier that it's almost foolish to look ahead 20 minutes, much less 20 years in the Middle East. But if you were to look ahead 5 years, not a fantasy level, by the way, part of the title of your last book, which is excellent. What's the full title?
I can't plug it. Power, Faith, and Fantasy.
That wasn't a plug. It was just informational. If you look ahead on a possible level, not pie in the sky, positive but realistic, 5 years from now, what could you perceive?
I know we'd like to see for the Middle East. We'd like to see the emergence of democratic, peace-loving governments in all of our neighboring countries. And I stress that peace-loving. We'd like our neighbors to enjoy the same rights that our citizens enjoy. We'd like equality between women and men, rights for different minorities, for lesbian and gay populations, the type of rights that they enjoy in the State of Israel. We'd like to have all of our neighbors enjoy those rights and participate in building a truly new Middle East. Middle East which offers a far brighter future for our children and grandchildren. For Israel, I see a continuation of a situation. We face in many ways monumental threats, and we face a wide spectrum of monumental threats, but we can't lose an historic position. To look forward, we have to look back. And I don't know, we got some young people in the audience. When I was in college, the thought that we would have peace with Jordan in Egypt was unthinkable. To think that we would have peace with Russia and what was then known as the Soviet bloc countries was unthinkable. To think that we would have diplomatic relations with India was unthinkable. Israel is one of our greatest customers in the world today. Our son Yoav lives in Shanghai, working for an American, partially Israeli company. We've now celebrated 20 years of relations with China, and our economic relations with China are growing. Our economic connections are growing at about 30% per year. Unthinkable when I was a young person. And even when I was a very young person, we didn't have the strategic alliance with the United States of America. Israel, by every objective criterion, it is off the charts. Whether it be in tourism, which has grown by about 27% last year alone. You can't get a seat on a plane or a hotel in the state of Israel. Our economy, which has navigated the difficult waters of the global recession with great success. The lowest unemployment rate. The fact that half of our universities are listed among the 100 great universities of the world, that Israel per capita is the second most educated country in the world after Canada. We're one of the healthiest and happiest countries in the world. They actually have statistics on this. We're the 5th healthiest society in the world. In the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, which we joined, we're now one of the 32 most developed economies in the world. We have the best healthcare system, best universal healthcare system. Think about this. We are exporting wine to France. We're exporting caviar to Russia.
And coals to Newcastle.
We are making the snowmaking machines for the Russian Winter Olympics. You can't make this stuff up. You cannot make this stuff up. And we have fabulous food. Just fabulous food. So, you got to keep that perspective. Looking 5 years ahead, I see an Israel that continues not just to survive, but to thrive.
2 states?
God willing, really God willing, and we understand that the only way to truly end this conflict is to divide, to make painful sacrifices, to divide an area which we regard as our ancestral homeland, our tribal lands, if you will, and because we understand it's also the homeland of another people, and we want to end that conflict. But it has to be ended in a way that provides us with recognition, true recognition. Israel as the Jewish state, that's not a tactical demand. Only we recognize the Palestinians as a people endowed with an unassailable right of self-determination. We need the Palestinians to recognize Israel, the Jewish state, as the nation state of the Jewish people that has the right of self-determination. Otherwise, it'll never end. We need security guarantees in case the peace breaks down. What if the Palestinian state can't go here? What if it falls to terrorists? We can't have 100,000 rockets in the West Bank aimed at our homes. We've had that experience in Gaza. We've had that experience in southern Lebanon. And we need an end of claims, end of conflict. It means that when we sign on the dotted line that there's peace, that's it. There's peace. The two-state solution is not a two-stage solution, which the second stage is Israel's dissolution. It's the end. It's true peace. But, as I said, God willing, inshallah, we should have true peace with our Palestinian neighbors.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much. Thank you.